Hey everyone, in this quick video we're going to look at how we can do advanced styling for our web application using CSS, and we'll also add some JavaScript interaction so that we can add some behaviors to our web app using JavaScript. So we already looked at CSS, we already looked at HTML in depth in a previous sprint, and for CSS we did some CSS using Bootstrap CSS framework, and so for that we put in class names on our HTML that we needed to use in order to pull in the styles from Bootstrap. But here we'll be looking at creating some of our own custom styles. And we'll look at JavaScript and how we can use it to handle things like a button click. So when we're talking about CSS, we have two parts to CSS definition, and the CSS is on the right-hand side. So the H1 there is called a CSS selector, and that's what we use to determine what elements the style is going to be applied to. And in this case, since we just have the H1 by itself in the selector, any H1 tag that's in our HTML is going to match that, and they're going to get turned blue. We have a couple other selectors here. So the dot in front of a selector means it's a class selector, and so this is going to look for class names that match anything. My custom heading, anything matches my custom heading is going to match, and it's going to turn blue. For the next one, we have a number sign or hash sign, and for that, it's going to match anything that has an ID that matches. So those are just a couple of the real basic ones that we can use to match elements in our HTML. There are a bunch of other selectors too that we can use, and we can combine them in very complex ways to do what we need to get done. For example, things like only match paragraphs are inside a div and so on. Let's take a look at some of that. Okay, so here's a sample page on W3 Schools, and it highlights a bunch of different definitions for our CSS. So here, an H1 selector will match any H1s. So we see when I select H1 that it highlights the H1. H1P with a comma will mean it matches all H1s and Ps. Div space P will mean that it'll only match Ps that are inside a div. The div greater than P will mean only match Ps that are immediately inside the div, so direct children of the div itself, and so on. So we have some other ones here. We have a checked one here, and so if a checkbox is checked or a radio button is checked, then those will match. And so we could do things like apply a style based on the state of an element, and same thing for focus. So focus is when we are able to type into a particular box. Then, so in this case, a border was put around the box based on the fact that it has focus. So you can look through these. There's some other styles here, such as like in a list, you can do even odd styling of rows and things like that and whatever. So just play around with these, and you can get an idea of the power of CSS selectors. When we want to include CSS in our web application, we have two ways of doing it. We can put it just inline in a style on the left-hand side, so we can just put our CSS right in the HTML, or we can do on the right-hand side and split it out into a separate file. As your project gets bigger, you'll want to probably put most of your stuff in separate files so that your files don't get too large, and it's easier to maintain. All right, let's take a look at a demo of CSS. Okay, so let's take a look at this main inline CSS. So here's the sample of what it looks like. And if we go to look at the HTML for it, we can see that we have an H1 color blue, but we have red up here. So what happened? Well, what happened was down here in the H1, we have a style color red. And this takes precedence. So you can put these CSS styles directly on an element like this, and those will always take priority over any other definitions that you have there. If I get rid of that and then I save it and we refresh the page, then it'll turn blue. So here we have inline CSS style. If we go to the other example, the external CSS, we'll see that we have a link to the style sheet, and then the CSS is actually in a separate file here, like this. So we can do this. We can also combine the two, so you can have inline and files. You can have multiple files that you're pulling in, so things like you could bring in Bootstrap and then bring in your own custom styles and so on. All right, so JavaScript. In the past, when we were doing some interactivity, when we were submitting a form or so on, we were just using the built-in stuff in HTML to do a submit button. But sometimes that's not enough, and we want to do other things. We want to do more complex things. We want to do things besides just submitting a form. So here we have, using JavaScript, we can do something when user clicks on something, type something in. We could do a progress bar based on, every second we can update a progress bar if something's taking a while to run and so on. And this is what our HTML with JavaScript would look like. So in this case, we have a button with an onClick attribute. That onClick attribute accepts a piece of JavaScript. So we could put just any JavaScript we want inside that onClick equals, but it's better to separate it out into a function. And so we're calling this button click function, and then the function is defined on the right-hand side. And we see that it's getting a reference to the button by the ID. So it's looking for an ID called my button. And then it's setting the inner text of it. So in this case, the button would change its text when you click on it from click me to clicked. Again, including JavaScript in our app, we have two options. Again, just like we have with CSS, we can put it just inline as we have on the left-hand side and just put our script right in line. Or we can put it in a separate file like we see on the right-hand side. And again, the same sort of reasoning applies where these things can get big, and when they do, it's easier if you separate out into separate files to be able to maintain your application. All right, let's take a look at JavaScript demo. So we have some JavaScript here, and I'm just going to run the inline version, and I'm going to click the button, and we see that the counter goes up. So how does this work? Let's take a look at the main inline again. And we see that we have this script function here. We have a counter, which starts at 0. We have this function that executes, and that's based on this onClick that happens down here. So we have button click here, and then that executes this. It gets the div for the result, which is here, based on this ID. So it gets this div based on this ID. And I have two different options here. Like, these are equivalent. These do the same thing. The top one is more like a CSS selector where I can say just matching ID equals results. So we can match on it. We can do all sorts of types of queries there. But get element by ID is one of the more common things you're going to have to do. So it has its own function for that. And so we can just specify the ID name that we're going to match on. So either of these would work. So if I said result div2.enterText here, it would do the same thing. Okay, so that's a sample of JavaScript. If we're going to put it in a separate file, then we just with Notepad. We just, instead of having the inline script in the head here, we have this script tag here. Now I put it at the bottom. This is something quickly to point out. By doing this and putting the script at the bottom, this page will load in the order that things are specified. So by putting the script at the bottom, it makes it so that loads last. And so the rest of the page will load, and you'll actually see something shown on the screen before it loads that script. And this is pretty common that developers will do this so that you can see stuff on the page and you're not just looking at a blank screen until the whole thing loads. We're going to look at developer tools. So pretty much all modern web browsers include developer tools, and this is a way that you can figure out what's going wrong in your application without by just looking at information that's in the developer tools window. So, and you can also do things like modify your CSS and things like that and see how things look by doing that. So let's take a quick look at a demo of this. I have this Flask project, and it has a main page and a success page. So let's go ahead and open this. And what this is going to do is I have a button that's disabled by default. And as I start typing, you see how that button gets enabled. And so that's JavaScript that's doing that. And so if we look at the code for this, we have this handle text change function. And it is, so that's getting called, and that's getting called based on the input changing on the text box. So, and that's setting the disabled button. So let's put like an error in here. So let's say I change that and then I restart the application. Okay, so I'm going to run it again. And now when I type in, you see that the box doesn't, the button doesn't enable. And if I look at my tools, my developer tools, I can see that in the console window, I can see that FLSE is not defined. And if I click on that, I can see the actual line where the error is happening. So it's telling me that I need to fix that. And so I can go back into my code and fix that. You know, it points me right to where the issue is. Now, one other thing I can do here is I can go and I can select an element. So I can select an element here. And now on this element, so I selected this label. And then in the style for it, I can do something like font size 50. 59 is fine, 50. Okay. So I can play with CSS styles directly right here in the console and right here in the developer tools. And once I get the CSS the way I want it to be, then I could go ahead and apply it back to my project. Anything that I do in this window is not going to be saved in your project. You'll have to go ahead and manually add that after you make your changes. So that's a brief look at advanced styling and advanced features for web development. And I hope that this helps in your efforts today, and good luck with the sprint.